and welcome back to another episode of Advanced RC Adventures. This is a channel where we investigate, explore, build and explain, upgrade and advance Nitro RCs to another level. Come start a new adventure with me. A2RC here with another 10th scale touring car overview. This is the HPI RS4, what I'm calling my carbon version. There are many that had an opportunity to go into the community page and vote on what they wanted to see next. Most of the votes went towards the carbon car. All of them will eventually make it to the channel, and there are some that are not yet even revealed, not yet voted on. But there will be an all blue alloy version. There's this carbon fiber version, an all silver version, and a couple more. But this is what I like to call my quote-unquote kind of basher setup car. This car, this RS4, it's hard to say whether it's an RS4, original, racer 2, because all of my builds have combinations of elements to it from all the different series. This is an RS4 Racer 2 version chassis, lower chassis. It has that big cutout. It's essentially the same as the RS4 Tour 2 ready to run chassis, but it has this cutout. So it provides a little bit of access for installation of components as well as a little bit lightweight. This chassis was purchased separately for the build for this carbon version, but it was all piecemealed together. All the individual components were purchased, put together, and let's do a little walkthrough here. First and foremost, we have the HPI T3.0 engine. I've had this engine on this build from the summer of 2001, around the July time. And for some reason, there weren't a lot of people over, at least in North America, that was aware that this T3.0 was almost a direct fit into these HPI RS4 chassis. Later, people started to catch on and was able to put on these T3.0s onto these RS4 belt-driven chassis, and it's a perfect fit. The only difference is that the flywheel, you're needing to use a collet style flywheel, which is not that big a deal, but you're not able to use the stock, I'm going to use the word like slot or key driven cast flywheel like the 12E and the 15FE and some of the OS-CV version engines able to use. But other than that, it uses integrated engine mounts to use these holes. As long as you use some of the stock gearing, you're not needing to mess with mesh. The mesh is perfect. Now I have a 2-speed transmission on here, and this uses a 44 first gear spur and a 37 second gear spur, and that matches up with that specific 2-speed clutch bell. But there's no need for mesh adjustments, because this particular arrangement with this bell and the engine mount lineup, it provides the perfect mesh to begin with. Now, of course, you still check mesh and put in your paper or do what you need to do to check mesh, and there might be some fine adjustment, and if you have to slot out your holes down here, you can. But generally speaking, if you stick with quote-unquote stock gearing and you can use your 2-speed setup guide and paperwork, you should have good or close to perfect mesh from the beginning. But this T3.0 provides a lot of power for this 10th scale setup. These engines from HPI are quoted at 2.2 horsepower. I am not confident that that's the correct horsepower, but that is what they claim. I've done some previous kind of testing between the 18 CBR and this T3.0 on a very similar chassis and setup, and they are very comparable, but the OS 18 CBR edged out the T3.0, and that 18 CBR has a horsepower claim from OS of 1.3 or 1.4, something of that nature, compared to the 2.2 horsepower claim that this has. But this is still a perfect engine for this platform, and it looks great with this more than kind of black with a little bit of purple setup for this chassis. Now, I consider this to be kind of a basher setup. It's not stock by any means, but it doesn't have tons of bells and whistles. This T3.0 18 size engine is mated up with what I consider one of the best vintage and still today tune pipe and header setups. This is what Dynamite called their big bore header. It's a lot bigger diameter and has port matched flange for these small block engines, and this is a 2-stage pipe, and these pipes were at the time, 15-20 years ago, a dime a dozen. But I've tried so many pipes in the past with so many different types of engine combinations. These 2-chamber pipes work so well in the mid, low, and high range that it's a perfect pipe for most all side exhaust small block engines. You can't go wrong with them. It originally came with Dynamite's orange or reddish style coupler. I decided to put on this vintage HPI purple coupler to match with some of the other purple accents. We have HPI's race version fuel tank. On most all of my setups, I like to use a zip tie with a piece of fuel tubing here to hold and pull open the fuel tank lid. You can put a hole in your body and use that with the window cut out to fill up your tank, or it's just a lot easier to have something to hold. But this is just a simple 8-inch zip tie with a piece of fuel tubing, and I like to color match fuel tubing with the zip tie and other pieces just to have some kind of color arrangement. Let's take a look at the wheels here. These are Contact brand foams. We have 35 Shore in the front and 35 Shore in the rear, but this is a 26 millimeter tire, that's the width, and this is a 30 millimeter tire in the rear, again that's the width, so it's a little bit wider in the rear compared to the front, but it's the same Shore value on this particular car. And both sets front and rear tires were turned to match. On 4-wheel drive cars, you want to have the front and the rear tires to have the same diameter. Now, sometimes depending on your Shore values, if you decide to have a softer Shore value on the rear, you want to have that rear tire slightly bigger in diameter. Not much, maybe a millimeter, no more than 2 millimeter than the front. And what that allows for is as the rears start to wear out more, because you're going to have more delivery of power to the rear from the drivetrain to the front. And since your front tires are in that more nimble steering, you're not going to have as much wear as you find that you're going to have in the rear. So having these rear tire diameter the same as the front is needed, but sometimes you can have them maybe a millimeter or more. And what that does is it just provides a touch more wiggle room of wear on your rears, and as they wear, it tends to have a little bit more even wear from front to rear, since you have more grip and traction and more wear on your rear tires compared to your front. We're running sway bars on the front and the rear. This is the HPI version sway bar. We have the green medium on the rear. It's going to be difficult to see, but we have purple hard sway bar in the front. We've talked about before on most touring car setups, you want to have a little bit stiffer shock and spring setup and sway bar setup in the front, because that sees the large majority of the force in your turns, and you want to have a little bit more stability in the front. We have an all carbon, what I would consider to be like the Ready to Run or RS4 2 version carbon upper deck. We have the HPI version front belt tensioner here. We're running a vintage Spectrum SR3000 receiver and some vintage Spectrum servos. We have a Z590 and a Z270. The Z590, if you're not aware, is the same essential part number as JR, old vintage numbers, and this is a middle gear servo. But these are not sophisticated, these are not fancy servos. This is what I would call like a ready to run style servo for this basher style car setup. But this is still using, even though it's more of a vintage style, this is still 2.4 gigahertz system. We have a Trinity 5-cell hump pack, nickel metal hydride 1600 milliamp receiver pack. We have our HPI version side belt tensioner and gear brace. Some RRP aluminum 18-tooth pulleys. On the back here we have the carbon fiber rear HPI tower. And for shocks all the way around, we have super shocks, but I still have for mainly color, but I know that it's good enough for this basher style. We have the stock 2-stage springs on here on the super shock setup all the way around on all 4 corners for the shock setup. Let's keep moving around here. In my opinion, these stock bevel diffs, especially if you set them up well and shim them properly and have some good or appropriate grease inside, these bevel gears are bulletproof compared to the ball diffs. Ball diffs are nice, especially for racing and especially high grip situations like carpet touring car racing, to be able to adjust the resistance of the balls. But for a basher style parking lot racing running, these bevel gears are bulletproof. And when you have a big engine like this T3.0 on a differential that was only designed for 1 horsepower or less, I've put these things through the ringer and they continue to allow the abuse to happen without much issue, especially with some relatively sticky shore value foams. They do great. I'm more worried about the transmission, especially the second gear clutch pawl, that cam arm that comes out. I'm more worried about the transmission than the differential themselves. So I recommend using these bevel style gear diffs before ball diffs, even though a number of my RS4s have ball diffs as well. When we go to other chassis platforms, we will discuss ball diffs, and we'll even have in a later episode a conversation and disassembly about RS4 diffs themselves and go in a little bit more into detail. Notice here I have the stock camber links on the rear, and that's for 2 reasons. 1, this is just a parking lot basher style, but 2, in my opinion, from all of the different cars and adjustments that I've done, this stock setup gives you a 0-degree camber, and it works really well for these cars. We have the stock arms. You can put on your graphite upgraded ones if you want, but the stock arms work great, especially in this situation. Provides enough rigidity, but enough flexibility if you hit a curb or something, and allows you to continue to run. We have our carbon fiber Y brace here. We use a little bit of fuel line for the brake link to provide a little bit better brake response. For the air filter here, some may find it important, but I like to provide a little bit of insight on why I do things. This elbow here comes with a T3.0, but I am not running the filter element that comes with the T3.0. This is actually Dynamite 10th scale version filter and pre-filter on the T3.0 elbow. This elbow allows it to rise up a little bit higher over top of the servo links, but I really like these Dynamite 10th scale filters and pre-filters. Buy the full kit that gives you the oil as well as the pre-filter. You can run the ones without the pre-filter, no problem, but these pre-filters work great, and it provides a little bit of dark gray or black element to the build. The antenna here, we use the stock antenna tube holder that comes with the carbon fiber Y brace, but I drilled a hole into that upper deck and put on it into the middle of the chassis. I prefer trying to put my antennas in the middle of the chassis of all the cars if possible. It helps with the layout and keeps your antenna centered with the car, and personally I think it looks a little bit better this way. And there are some antennas that you're allowed to cut short, and some that just have a short tube, and if you have it in the center here, you can very easily run your antenna in through the tube without any issue, and not having to put it all the way back here on the Y brace like a lot of the models suggest. It's going to be really difficult to see, but with the carbon fiber theme, I have an all carbon fiber disc brake here in the back, utilizing the same cam and the same brake pads, but it uses a full carbon fiber disc, and that tends to work pretty well. The fiber disc works really well also. I almost think that what came with the Racer 2, the fiber disc, actually works maybe a little bit better than the carbon fiber, but the carbon fiber disc perform well enough. Just a matter of setup. Every once in a while you need to take your disc out and resurface it and put it back in, and you're ready to go again. Let's take a look here at steering. This is one of the main upgrades that I suggest for every single 10 scale RS4, whether it's original version or up to the Racer 2. You need some form of alloy steering rack. This is the GPM style. GPM came out with a few different styles, but this is a really good one. And the reason being is that you want to try to eliminate as much slop that you can from your steering input, and the only real way to do that is to have some kind of alloy steering rack. These are upgraded to ball bearings. There's a carbon fiber center shaft into that steering rack, and all those things combined allows for very, very minimal wiggle on the steering rack through the tie rod links to your tires, so that when you provide an input from your steering servo, whether it's something relatively basic like this Z590 servo, or something super elaborate like some high-grade Protex, etc., you want that steering input to be nimble and direct and specific. You don't want your tires to be wobbling around because you have a sloppy rack. So these vintage racks are getting really difficult to find. Every once in a while they pop up on the market, and if you can get your hands on it, you should do it, rebuild them, or if you can find them new, even better. If they only come with the plastic bushings, put in ball bearings, shim them appropriately to try to get as much slop out of there as possible, and you will thank yourself in the end. They are great things to have, an awesome upgrade, even on what I consider this basher style car, even though there's a number of different upgrades and updated elements. That steering rack is essential for any of your builds. One of the last pieces of the puzzle, and something that is unique to some, but a lot of the old style vintage racers, these front carbon fiber shock towers are, in my opinion, a must-have. The carbon fiber towers that you can get and are designed for like the RS4 2 versions are fine, but this is actually an older style Pro 2 version. They are thicker and they have a lot more hole adjustments than the quote-unquote carbon fiber tower for the RS4 2. So if you can find one of these available, go ahead and pick up the what would be like considered the original carbon fiber front tower, and that's fine. It still has some adjustments. But if you can find, or you're willing to try, find these Pro 2 versions, and you'll have so many more setup options for your shock setup for your touring car that you will enjoy the experience that much more. On the front here too, we have our camber links for our left and right side, and something to note that a lot of people may or may not know: when you're putting on your turnbuckles, see the design. We have our nut on this right hand side of the turnbuckle, and we have it on the exact same side here. You may be amped to make them in a way symmetrical, where if we think of this as kind of like an arrow going this way, the arrows going this way, you want to have them facing one another or facing opposite of one another to kind of make the image or the turnbuckle symmetrical. You actually want to make them the same direction. That way when you come in here with your turnbuckle wrench, you can turn them, for example, from front to back on either one, and you'll be closing or opening it the same way. If you have them opposite, in a way kind of like symmetrical or mirrored, maybe is a better term, then if you turn this one from front to back, it may make the camber go in or out, but it's going to be the opposite on this side. If you make the turnbuckles, if you build them the same way, when you turn it from front to back, and let's say it pulls the in, it'll do the same here. So it just makes your setup a little bit easier if you can have your turnbuckles kind of built the same way and installed the same way. These cars are so fun to build and to drive. What is not to love about these 10th scale RS4, RS4 2, ready to run, racer style version cars? We will have in a later episode a POV video of this car driving. We will do some runs to show acceleration, G-force, top speed, 132 foot runs with this T3.0 and this basher style RS4 2 carbon version car. And we'll bring this to you to share on Advanced RC Adventures. Feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you like anything 10th scale, nitro, and especially touring cars, then this is the place to be. And thanks for taking the adventure with me.